I hope you're ready to dive into a history full of ropes and screaming ladies, because today you've clicked on an especially brutal thumbnail, and the content is going to be just as brutal. Go grab a sandwich and hold on to your chair, as it's about to get weird. And by the way, all those who watch today's documentary until the end get to talk to a hot girl tomorrow. No more sweet talk, time to get down to business. The origins of BDSM, which stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism, trace back to early human tribes and their practices. No wonder, right? From the dawn of civilization, power dynamics and rituals of dominance and submission were crucial in social structures. Archaeological evidence suggests prehistoric societies engaged in acts resembling modern BDSM. Cave paintings and carvings from the Paleolithic era depict individuals bound and marked symbolically, often in coming-of-age ceremonies or spiritual rituals connecting participants with supernatural entities. I've always wondered about these sexual cave paintings. Imagine coming home to your cave one day and your wife asks you what you've been up to, and you stand there contemplating if you should admit you just carved BDSM scenes onto another cave wall 3 miles from your home. But the fact is, these historical practices laid the foundation for the complex interplay of power, control, and trust that defines modern BDSM. Next came ancient Mesopotamia around 3500 BC in the modern-day Middle East. Early Mesopotamian societies documented relationships through literature, notably Sumerian texts. The sacred marriage rituals, where priestesses dominated kings or high-ranking officials, reveal early BDSM elements. It's always the ultra-rich that want to get tied up the hardest, it seems. Artifacts like tablets and carvings depict scenes of restraint and control. The Epic of Gilgamesh, from around 2100 BC, subtly references power dynamics in relationships. Court records from Uruk acknowledge practices involving dominance and submission, which held deep religious and societal significance. Deities like Inanna and Ereshkigal symbolized power and submission dualities. Ancient texts describe rites involving flagellation and bondage as worship and penitence forms. These acts, conducted within sanctuaries, indicate a controlled and consensual environment. Dominant and submissive roles appeared in literature, art, and performances, embedding these practices into public consciousness. Babylonian and Assyrian records indicate the continued use of physical restraint and penance in religious ceremonies. The Assyrian Empire, which rose in the late Bronze Age, documented similar state-sponsored cultic activities. To me, it seems like they were heavily into roleplay and BDSM while covering it up with some deity talk, but to each their own. And now, ancient Greece, where practices resembling BDSM were documented and rather common as well. Greek society featured a range of roles. One of the earliest mentions appears in Greek mythology, where Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, had an affair involving restraints and bondage. Their tales suggest a symbolic representation of dominance and submission. Additionally, the Greeks practiced pederasty, where older men formed educational and intimate relationships with younger boys, sometimes including rites of passage with elements of dominance, hinting at early BDSM dynamics. Ceremonial flagellation was also practiced in religious contexts, often as part of rituals dedicated to Artemis Orthia. These flagellations served as offerings or purification rites within the cult. Philosopher Plato, in his works, hinted at power dynamics in relationships, suggesting control and submission, although not explicitly mentioning BDSM. In addition, in ancient Greece, BDSM-related activities can be seen in the context of slavery and servitude. Slaves often faced physical punishment and domination as control methods by their masters. Although non-consensual and different from modern BDSM, these practices influenced power dynamics involving pain and submission. Additionally, symposiums, exclusive gatherings of Greek men, included social domination and submission rituals. These events featured drinking, philosophical discussions, and sometimes the physical subjugation of participants or entertainers, intertwining status and power and laying a foundation for dominance and submissive relationships. Ancient texts by playwrights like Aristophanes and Euripides reference masochistic enjoyment of pain or submissive sexuality. These public plays subtly explored control and pleasure themes through characters and plots, reflecting societal norms on power dynamics. Vase paintings and sculptures often depict power dynamics and erotic bondage. One notable example is the kylix, an ancient Greek drinking cup showing various erotic and mythological scenes, including hints of bondage and submission. Historical accounts describe military practices involving physical discipline and hazing, echoing modern BDSM elements. Soldiers underwent rigorous physical trials, including flogging, to instill discipline and loyalty, highlighting the intersection of pain, obedience, and authority. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates acknowledged controlled pain in therapeutic contexts. His medical writings recognize the complex relationship between pain and healing. Public punishments in ancient Greek law such as whipping and public humiliation, reinforced social order through enforced submission, contributing to a culture intertwining dominance and subjugation. These practices show that elements of BDSM, understood through power dynamics and submission, were embedded in various facets of ancient Greek culture, from mythology and rituals to daily life and jurisprudence. And if you haven't already, go give this video an interesting comment so you'll have done your own part in educating people as well. Right now, I'm carrying all the load, but as a father, you should know better and help other fathers out. After all, your comments are a big part of why I do these documentaries. But now, moving on to ancient Rome. In ancient Roman society, power dynamics and punishment were integral to daily life and entertainment. Public spectacles like gladiatorial games and flogging illustrated a fascination with dominance, submission, and physical suffering. Slavery was fundamental, with masters exercising complete control over slaves, often inflicting punishments to assert authority. Consensual practices also existed, where individuals engaged in dominance and submission for pleasure. Roman poets like Ovid reflect a nuanced understanding of these dynamics, hinting at the eroticization of pain and control, suggesting early forms of bondage and discipline. Roman legal texts document specific laws about slave treatment, providing a structured framework of acceptable practices. Legal, social, and personal documents from this period offer a comprehensive view of how power, control, and physical discipline intertwined in the Roman worldview. The Roman approach to discipline and punishment was both utilitarian and ritualistic, imbued with symbolic significance. Instruments like whips, chains, and rods served as tools of punishment and symbols of power. The infamous Roman flagrum, a whip embedded with metal or bone shards, was used for punitive measures and to display state and master dominion over individuals. These instruments' ceremonial nature suggests an element of spectacle intended to reinforce social hierarchies and control. Roman literature and theater often depicted bondage and physical punishment, reflecting cultural engagement with dominance and submission themes. The line between consensual and non-consensual acts was often blurred in ancient Rome. While slaves had little autonomy, free citizens sometimes engaged in power play for erotic purposes, indicating a voluntary aspect to some practices. The legacy of Roman practices related to BDSM influenced medieval and early modern European attitudes towards punishment, discipline, and erotica. And I think we all know where we've arrived now. Here's the good old dirty Middle Ages. BDSM, which stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism, obviously also has its place in the Middle Ages. And although we explained the meaning of BDSM a minute ago, I think we can all agree it's always good to refresh your memory. And while ancient cultures engaged in erotic power exchanges, BDSM's structured nature became more apparent in medieval time. Early instances of BDSM align with judicial corporal punishment. Medieval society used flogging and other punishments to maintain order, inadvertently laying the groundwork for modern BDSM. Historical records from the 13th century reveal that such punishments sometimes included erotic elements, evident in the fetish attire of executioners and the ceremonial nature of public punishment. The Middle Ages also saw chivalric rituals involving submission and dominance. Knights pledged service and obedience to their lords, reflecting BDSM dynamics. The flagellant movements of the 13th and 14th centuries, involving self-flagellation as penance, blended pain with spiritual devotion. This era believed enduring pain led to spiritual purification, shaping the psychological foundation of many BDSM practices today. Oh yes, the medieval period offers deep, dirty insights into the evolution of BDSM. Texts like the Lace of Marie de France describe knights enduring trials to prove devotion. The Church influenced this era, with self-flagellation as acts of penance becoming common. European witch trials during the Renaissance featured coerced confessions of BDSM-like practices, with accused witches describing sabbats involving submission and pain, likely influenced by inquisitors. By the late Middle Ages, BDSM-like practices evolved, influenced by the rise of courtly love. This concept, often idealized in literature, involved submission and idealization, mirroring BDSM interactions. Courtly love emphasized the woman as an unattainable, almost divine figure to whom the male lover would submit and serve, akin to the power exchange in BDSM relationships. Additionally, works by historical figures like Geoffrey Chaucer and Andreas Capellanus depicted themes of bondage and discipline in their romantic stories. As the Middle Ages progressed, BDSM elements increasingly integrated into religious and societal norms. Flagellation, with its intricate rituals and emphasis on pain as spiritual release, became widespread. Monasteries and religious sects regularly practiced self-flagellation. Underground sects, believing in the erotic potential of pain and submission, remained secretive due to the risk of persecution. Influential figures like Saint Catherine of Siena glorified mortification of the flesh, advocating a blend of pain and devotion resonant with modern BDSM practices. These elements laid the groundwork for the organized development of BDSM in later centuries. And before hopping onto the Renaissance era, here's a quick overview of BDSM activities in ancient Japan, which I know you'll just love. The origins of BDSM in ancient Japan are fascinating and complex, deeply intertwined with cultural practices and spiritual beliefs. During the Heian period, from 794 to 1185 AD, the concept of binding, known as Hojo Jutsu, began to surface. Hojo Jutsu was a martial art used by samurai to restrain captives with ropes, reflecting both the practical need for prisoner control and a deeper aesthetic appreciation of the intricate rope pattern. This practice's roots mysteriously connect to Buddhism, where restraint and control mirrored spiritual discipline and morality. Samurai, adhering to a strict code known as Bushido, used rope not only for combat, but also as an artistic and spiritual expression. Over time, Hojo Jutsu evolved, making way for Kinbaku in the Edo period, from 1603 to 1868 AD. Kinbaku, also known as Shibari, transformed the pragmatic approach of Hojutsu into an erotic art form. Rope binding became an intimate act, emphasizing trust and the power dynamics between individuals. Detailed bindings escalated both aesthetic artistry and emotional connections, merging physical control with psychological depth. This transition was influenced by the floating world, or ukiyo, a cultural renaissance that celebrated pleasure and art. Kabuki theater and woodblock prints, known as ukiyo-e, reflected these themes, visualizing intricate rope-tying scenes. Kinbaku also embodied the Japanese wabi-sabi philosophy, finding beauty in imperfection and transience. Masters like Seiyu Ito brought shibari into the modern age, emphasizing its artistic essence. The Meiji Restoration period, from 1868 to 1912 AD, played a crucial role in shaping modern Japanese culture and the evolution of BDSM. This era of rapid modernization and Western influence sparked a renewed interest in traditional Japanese arts, including shibari, to preserve national identity. Practitioners began incorporating Western techniques, enriching the practice and expanding its global reach. By the early 20th century, Kinbaku had grown beyond a niche subculture in Japan, attracting dedicated followers who refined its techniques. Publications and workshops delved into the emotional and psychological bonds created through shibari. Themes of control, vulnerability, and trust inherent in BDSM were explored through intricate rope patterns and the dynamic between the binder and the bound. Post-World War II, as Japan experienced societal changes, Western influence introduced new perspectives on sexuality and power dynamics, which were integrated into Japanese traditions. Despite periods of repression, shibari resurged in the 1950s and 1960s, reflected in contemporary art and subcultures. Today, shibari has garnered international interest, with practitioners worldwide recognizing its historical roots and multifaceted nature. Figures like Akechi Denki and Arisue Go have been pivotal in bringing modern shibari to the forefront of Japanese and global BDSM communities. The evolution of rope bondage from samurai martial techniques to a sophisticated form of intimacy highlights the profound connections between cultural heritage, artistic expression, and human emotion. And now, one of the most famous BDSM practitioners throughout history, and a notable figure, is Roman Emperor Tiberius, who ruled from 14 AD to 37 AD. Tiberius was known for his unconventional sexual behaviors, including dominant and submissive practices. Another significant individual was the infamous Marquis de Sade, an 18th-century French aristocrat. De Sade's libertine sexuality, detailed in his writings, involved both consensual and non-consensual sadomasochistic activities, leading to his imprisonment or confinement in asylums. In the 19th century, Austrian writer Leopold von Sacher-Masoch explored themes of female dominance and male submission in his literature. His 1870 novel, Venus in Furs, directly influenced the term masochism. These early figures laid the foundation for understanding BDSM as a complex interplay of power, control, and consensual role exchange. Their practices, often scandalous and taboo, have shaped modern interpretations and the community's evolving guidelines on consent and safety. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a surge in underground publications and secret societies exploring eroticism and sexual liberation. The mid-19th century invention of photography further facilitated the portrayal of BDSM themes. Erotic photographs depicting bondage and domination became more accessible, discreetly visualizing and sharing these themes. By the late 19th century, BDSM practices were increasingly documented in medical and psychiatric literature. German psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing published Psychopathia Sexualis in 1886, a comprehensive study of sexual deviations, including sadism and masochism. This work brought BDSM into academic discourse, albeit pathologized. Krafft-Ebing's case studies and theoretical frameworks laid the groundwork for future scholars and practitioners. Early fetish clubs and gatherings formed in Europe, offering spaces for more open, yet still secretive exploration of BDSM due to social norms and legal constraints. Knowledge sharing within these communities helped establish a broader understanding and codification of BDSM practices. Correspondence columns in various erotic magazines provided platforms for discussion and idea exchange among enthusiasts, instrumental in disseminating knowledge and normalizing these practices. In the early 20th century, the cultural foundations of the 18th and 19th centuries helped BDSM practices evolve. Avant-garde movements like Surrealism and Dada challenged norms and celebrated alternative sexual expressions. Psychiatrist Wilhelm Steckel expanded on Krafft-Ebing's work, exploring sadomasochistic desires. Publications like The Pearl, an underground Victorian magazine, kept BDSM and other taboo subjects in public consciousness despite controversy. Parallel advancements in psychology, such as Sigmund Freud's work, delved deeper into human sexuality and subconscious desires. Clandestine clubs and secret gatherings provided safe spaces for individuals to express their sexuality without societal backlash. In the 1950s and 1960s, organizations like the gay leather community formed, uniting individuals with shared interests in BDSM and leather culture. Magazines such as Bizarre and The Leather Boy began publishing, offering a platform for communities to connect and share information. The sexual revolution of the late 1960s and 1970s significantly impacted public perception of BDSM. This period saw increased openness about various sexual practices, including BDSM, as people challenged traditional sexual norms. Films like The Story of O and The Image brought BDSM themes into mainstream media, further normalizing the subject. The advent of the internet in the late 20th century provided an unprecedented platform for the BDSM community to grow and organize. Online forums, chat rooms, and websites allowed individuals to connect, share knowledge, and find a sense of belonging. The creation of FetLife in 2008, a social networking site for those interested in BDSM, kink, and fetish culture, was a significant milestone. FetLife united a global community and facilitated a wider network of support and information exchange. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, academic interest in BDSM increased. Researchers studied BDSM practices and communities, leading to greater understanding and acceptance within broader society. Studies focused on the psychology, sociology, and health aspects of BDSM, debunking misconceptions and reducing stigma. And that's it for today, my good old perverted friends. Be sure to subscribe to our weird and unique channel, as you can be sure there's no one out there like us. Some of our videos should have already popped up on the screen, so definitely click on them if you want to get laid as soon as possible. I've blessed all of our videos with love spells, so you can trust me on that one. After all, I'm a wizard of some sort. Okay, see you soon, and keep on pumping that blood. Your one and only nighttime friend, history but fast.